There are moments in life when you wake up and feel that something is wrong. It's not that feeling of having forgotten something important, or of being late for work. It's something deeper, more disturbing, as if the world had changed while you were sleeping. And that's exactly what happened to me. But before I tell you what happened on that morning that changed everything, I need you to do something for me. If this story touches you in any way, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from right now. It doesn't have to be specific, just tell me if you're at home, at work, traveling. It makes me feel like I'm not alone in this madness. My name is Helena. I'm 34 years old. Or I was. Now I'm not sure about anything anymore. 3 years ago, I lost my husband, Daniel, in a car accident. It was on our wedding anniversary. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5. He was coming home with flowers and a bottle of wine when a truck lost control on the wet road. The doctors said it was instantaneous. That he didn't suffer. As if that made things any easier. The next 3 years were a blur of therapy, antidepressants, and sleepless nights. My younger sister, Julia, was my rock. She helped me with everything, from the bills to reminding me to eat. We were close before, but Daniel's death brought us even closer. She had never known him very well, actually. When we got married, Julia was living abroad, doing her master's. She only came back a few months before the accident, and even so, they only saw each other 2 or 3 times. But back to that morning. It was a Friday. I remember because I had an appointment with my psychologist at 3 in the afternoon. I woke up with the sun hitting my face through the partially open curtain. First strange thing, I always sleep with the curtains completely closed. Always. Since I was a child. I opened my eyes slowly, still half groggy, and realized I was wearing pajamas I didn't recognize. A light blue silk set, delicate, expensive. It wasn't my style. I slept in an old t-shirt and shorts. I sat up in bed and looked around. The room. It wasn't my room. The walls were a soft gray, not the beige I had painted them. The furniture was different, modern, minimalist. There were abstract paintings on the walls that I had never seen before in my life. My heart started to race. I thought maybe I was in someone else's house, that maybe I had drunk too much the night before and couldn't remember. But no. I hadn't had a drink since Daniel's funeral. Not a single drop. I got out of bed, my legs shaky, and went to the mirror. And that's when everything really started to fall apart. My reflection was different. Not drastically, but enough to make me freeze. My hair was longer, almost reaching my waist. I had cut it short 6 months ago, shoulder length. My skin was better, healthier, without the deep dark circles that had become my trademark. And there was a small scar near my left eyebrow. A scar that wasn't there the day before. My breathing started to fail. Panic. It was a panic attack. I knew the feeling well. I tried to do the breathing exercises my therapist taught me, but it was hard. I opened the bedroom door and stepped into a hallway I didn't recognize. The house was large, well-decorated, clearly expensive. It wasn't my small 2-bedroom apartment. I went down the stairs, gripping the handrail as if my life depended on it. Voices came from the kitchen. Laughter. The smell of fresh coffee and pancakes. I followed the sounds, each step feeling like it weighed a ton. And then when I walked into the kitchen, my world stopped completely. Daniel was there. My husband. My dead husband was standing by the stove, flipping pancakes, wearing a ridiculous apron with the phrase "kiss the cook." He was alive. Real. Smiling. His brown eyes shining in that way I thought I'd never see again. My legs almost gave out. I grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. And then he turned to me and said, "Good morning, sleepyhead. I thought you were going to sleep until noon." His voice. That voice I heard in my dreams, that haunted me in the lonely early hours. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. He frowned, concerned. "Are you okay? You look pale." Before I could answer, another familiar voice echoed through the kitchen. "She's probably hungover. Last night was a long one." Julia. My sister walked into the kitchen wearing a robe. The robe that matched Daniel's apron. And then, as I watched in absolute shock, she went up to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and kissed him. Not a quick peck on the cheek. A couple's kiss. An intimate one. Of years together. Daniel laughed and kissed her back, then looked at me with a confused expression. Seriously, Helena, you're acting weird. Do you want me to call a doctor? Helena. He called me Helena. But the way he said it wasn't how my husband spoke to me. It was like how you speak to your sister-in-law. Politely, but without that layer of deep love, of shared history. I need some air, I managed to stammer, and ran out of the kitchen. I heard Daniel call after me, worried, but I didn't stop. I went out the front door and found myself in a huge, well-kept garden with flowers I didn't recognize. The street was different. The surrounding houses were different. Everything was different. I went back inside, past Daniel and Julia, who were now clearly alarmed, and ran up to the bedroom. I desperately searched for my phone. I found an iPhone on the nightstand. It wasn't my model, but when I picked it up, it unlocked with my face. I opened the Photos app with trembling hands. And there, in those hundreds of photos, was my new reality. Photos of Julia and Daniel. Their wedding. Honeymoon. Birthdays. Christmas. Julia pregnant. A baby. A small child. Years of memories I hadn't lived, but that apparently existed. And me? I was in some photos, always on the side, always alone or with friends I didn't recognize. The single sister. Their son's aunt. I went through each photo, each one like a stab wound. There was one of their wedding dated 7 years ago. 7 years. In my reality, that was when Daniel and I were planning our own wedding. There were family photos where my parents were there, smiling, celebrating Julia and Daniel's union. My parents who, in my memory, loved Daniel like a son. Then I saw a photo that made me drop the phone. It was recent, from a few months ago. Julia, Daniel, and me in a restaurant. Everyone smiling. But what froze me was the caption, "Dinner to celebrate Helena's promotion. Proud of you, little sis-in-law." Little sis-in-law. The word echoed in my head. In my reality, I was the wife. The widow. Here I was the sister-in-law. I heard a soft knock on the door. "Helena? Can I come in?" It was Julia. Her voice sounded genuinely worried. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself even a little, and said yes. She came in and sat on the bed next to me. "What's going on? You're scaring me. And Daniel too." I studied her face. My little sister. 2 years younger than me. Her green eyes, so much like mine, were filled with sincere concern. "Julia," I began, my voice trembling. "How long have you and Daniel been married?" She looked at me like I had gone crazy. "Helena, did you hit your head? We'll have been married 8 years in June. You were the maid of honor, remember? And Lucas's godmother. Seriously, I'm starting to get really worried." Lucas. They had a son named Lucas. I searched my memories, but there was nothing. No memory of a nephew, of a wedding, of any of this life. "And how did you two meet?" I asked, needing to understand. Julia sighed, clearly thinking I was having some kind of mental breakdown. "In college. You know that. We were in the same program. We started dating in our sophomore year, got engaged right after graduation. That was almost 10 years ago, Helena. Why are you asking things you already know?" College. In my reality, I met Daniel in a coffee shop where I worked during college. He was a regular customer, always ordering the same latte and a chocolate croissant. We flirted for months until he finally asked me out. Julia was in England at that time, doing her master's. She never went to the same college as Daniel. Never met him there. But here this was their reality. Their story. And me? I was just the sister on the sidelines, watching it all happen. "Julia," I said carefully, "I need you to be honest with me. Did I ever mention having feelings for Daniel? Before you two got together?" She seemed genuinely confused. "What? No, never. Helena, what are you getting at? You always supported us. Always. You were the first person I told when we started dating, and you were so happy for me. For us." Every word was both a revelation and a loss. In this reality, I had never loved Daniel. Or maybe I had, but I never had the chance to be with him. He belonged to my sister. He always had. I spent the next few days in a state of confused shock, trying to adapt to this new reality while desperately searching for answers. I examined every corner of this life that wasn't mine, but apparently always had been. I had a good job as an editor at a major magazine. I had friends I didn't recognize but who treated me with familiarity. I had a whole life built here. I looked for any sign of my previous life. I searched my name and Daniel's together online. Nothing. I looked for the news report of the accident that killed him. It didn't exist. He had never died. At least not here. I went to a coffee shop we used to frequent, in my reality. It still existed, but when I walked in, no one recognized me. There were no shared memories with Daniel there. No first date. No marriage proposal at that corner table. Nothing. With each passing day, the memories of this new life started to become clearer, as if my brain was trying to adjust. Memories began to surface, overlapping with my old ones. I remembered Julia and Daniel's wedding. I remembered holding Lucas when he was born. I remembered family dinners, vacations together, silly arguments and reconciliations. But the memories of my other life, the life where Daniel was mine, also remained. Two sets of memories coexisting in the same brain. Our first time. Our wedding. His last words before he left the house on that fateful day. It was all still there, vivid and painful. I was living in two worlds at once, and it was tearing me apart. Now, if you're listening to this and you've ever experienced something unexplainable in your life, something that made you question reality itself, leave a comment. I need to know I'm not completely crazy. A month after waking up in this reality, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I arranged a dinner with just Julia, without Daniel, without Lucas. I needed to talk to her, even if she wouldn't believe me. Even if she thought I had lost my mind. We sat in an Italian restaurant, the same one where the photo celebrating my promotion had been taken. Julia was radiant, as always, telling me about the travel plans she and Daniel were making for their wedding anniversary. Every word was a small torture. Julia, I interrupted her. I need to tell you something. And I know it's going to sound completely insane, but I need you to hear me out. She paused, picked up her wine glass, and nodded. Okay. I'm listening. And so I told her everything. About waking up that morning. About my memories of a different life, where Daniel was my husband, where we got married, where he died in my arms 3 years ago. About how in that life I met him first, fell in love, built a life with him. About how every day in this new reality was forcing me to see the love of my life alive, but loving someone else. Loving my sister. Julia listened to me in absolute silence, her face shifting through various expressions. Confusion, concern, disbelief. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Helena, she said finally, her voice soft. This thing you're describing, it feels very real to you, doesn't it? I nodded, tears starting to fall. It is real. I know it is. I'm not crazy, Julia. I know how it sounds, but I swear. You need professional help, she said, taking my hand. And I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm genuinely worried. These delusions, these false memories, they could be a symptom of something serious. Please, let me make an appointment for you with a psychiatrist. A good one. It was useless. How could it not be? I was telling her that in another reality, I was married to her husband. That I had memories of making love to him, of building a life with him, of burying him. Of course she would think I was crazy. But then, something strange happened. A few weeks later, I started to notice small inconsistencies. Daniel casually mentioned a detail about his wedding to Julia, but the detail didn't match the photos I had seen. Julia told a story about how they met, but it was slightly different from the version she had told me before. And there were moments, brief and unsettling, where Daniel would look at me in a different way. As if for a second, he also felt something that shouldn't be there. As if, for a moment, he remembered something he wasn't supposed to remember. One night, a few months later, I was at their house. Julia had gone out to take Lucas to the dentist. Daniel and I were left alone in the kitchen. He was making coffee, and the silence between us was heavy in a way it never had been before. Helena, he said suddenly, without turning around. Do you ever get the feeling you've forgotten something important? Like there's a memory right there, on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite reach it. My heart hammered. What do you mean? He finally turned, and his eyes met mine. There was something there, something that made me hold my breath. Sometimes I have these dreams. Dreams where everything is different. Where? He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Where we are different. Different how? I whispered. He opened his mouth to answer, but just then, we heard the front door open. Julia and Lucas were home. The moment was broken. Daniel shook his head, as if waking from a trance, and went back to the coffee. But I knew what I saw in his eyes in that brief moment. Recognition, confusion, and something else. Something that looked a lot like longing. In the following months, these small cracks in reality began to appear more frequently. Objects I remembered one way would appear another. People would mention events that I had no memory of in this reality, but which were perfectly clear from my previous life. And Daniel was starting to remember. I could see it in his eyes. In the moments he would pause mid-conversation, confused. In the times he would look at me with that expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. One night, 6 months after waking up in this reality, my phone rang at 3 a.m. It was Daniel. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. Helena, his voice was hoarse, frightened. I need to see you. Now. Alone. Please. We met in a park near their house, in the middle of the night. He was sitting on a bench, his head in his hands. When I sat next to him, he looked up at me with tormented eyes. I'm going crazy, he said. I have these memories, but they don't make sense. Memories of you and me. Together. Not as in-laws, but as a couple. Like we had a whole life together. And then there's an accident and pain and... He paused, his voice breaking. And I see you crying over my body. Tears streamed down my face. You're remembering. Remembering what? What's happening to me? To us? These memories feel so real, but my life is with Julia. I love Julia. We have a son. But then why? He looked at me, desperate. Why when I look at you, does my heart ache in a way it shouldn't? Because it's all real, I told him. In another life, in another reality, you were mine. We were a couple. We got married. And then you died. And I woke up here, where everything is different. Where you chose Julia. Or where fate chose differently. We sat there for hours, as the sun came up, sharing memories of a life that may or may not have existed. He remembered fragments. The day we met at the coffee shop. The marriage proposal on the beach. Small, intimate moments that only the two of us would know. What do we do now? He asked eventually. And that was the impossible question, wasn't it? Because even if he was remembering, even if in some crazy way our connection was crossing realities, he was still married to my sister. He still had a son. He still had a real life here. Nothing, I answered, my heart breaking all over again. You have a family here. A life. And as much as it hurts, as much as every day is agony for me, this is the reality now. Julia loves you. Lucas needs you. And I have to learn to live with it. What if there's a way to go back? He asked. To your reality? To our reality? I don't know if I want to go back, I admitted. There you're dead. Here you're alive. Even if it's in this impossible way, at least you're alive. We got up from that bench knowing we had to pretend that conversation never happened. That the memories were just strange dreams. That the connection between us was just a product of troubled imaginations. But it wasn't. And we both knew it. Today, a year after waking up in this reality, I'm still here. Still living this life that isn't mine, but has become mine for lack of a choice. I have dinner with Julia and Daniel. I play with Lucas, my nephew who in another life could have been my son. I smile in family photos and pretend there isn't a Daniel-shaped hole in my chest. Daniel and I don't talk about that night anymore. We don't talk about the memories. But sometimes, our eyes meet across the dinner table, and I know he remembers too. That he feels it too. That we are both living in two worlds at once. And Julia? Julia remains blissfully unaware of it all. And maybe it's better that way. How would you explain to your sister that in another life, in another reality, her husband was yours. How do you reconcile the love you feel with the love she has? How do you live with the guilt of wanting a life that would mean the destruction of her happiness? There are no easy answers. There is no clean resolution. There is only the choice to wake up every day and carry on. To love Daniel from a distance. To be the best sister and aunt I can be. To carry the weight of two realities alone. Because in the end, maybe that's what true love means sometimes. Letting go. Even when every fiber of your being screams to hold on. Even when you know in the deepest part of your heart that somewhere, somehow, you were meant to be together. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me. For bearing witness to this impossible story. And if you have your own impossible love story, of realities that could have been, of choices the universe made for you, leave a comment. Because maybe, just maybe, none of us are as alone as we think. And who knows? Maybe in some other reality, in some other universe, I'm telling a different story. One where I woke up in the right morning, in the right life, with the right person beside me. But this is my reality now. And I will learn to live with it. One day at a time.